In today's vlog, I'm going to share a special novel that I read years ago, now probably about 26 years ago, that really inspired me in a couple of different ways. It inspired me, number one, to want to read more, to read fiction more, but it also inspired me to something that's probably even more important to me today than even reading, and that's to be a writer. So the book that I'm going to talk about today that did all that inspiring is One-on-One by Tabitha King. I first picked up this book, and I actually have two copies of it. I have the original copy that I got in 1993, which is the one that has, as you can see, all the little bookmarks there, and you can see how old it is because it has a bookmark there that I used from when I used to subscribe to BMG to get cassette tapes and CDs years ago. I'm guessing probably CDs, but it might have been cassette tapes as well. So that tells you a little bit about how old it was. And many of these bookmarks have literally been in this book for probably 25 to 26 years. So that shows you how special this copy of this book was, because I've left it basically untouched for probably a quarter of a century. So this book is really special. And I ended up getting this copy. Let's turn it right side up. I ended up getting this copy of it a little bit later, and I did that for a few reasons. One is I didn't want to disrupt some of the bookmarks that I made in the older copy of it, and I also wanted an opportunity to be able to read the story again because it was such an inspiring story that really had that major impact on me, not only as a reader, but also as a writer. And so I really felt like, hey, let's go ahead and get another copy of it, and I'll be able to read it again and again and again if I so choose, and just kind of maybe continue to renew that inspiration that I felt 25, 26 years ago when I first read it. So let me read you the inside cover so you can get a little bit of a feel for what this book is all about. And I think those of you who know me a little bit or a lot, you'll be able to understand maybe a little bit about why this particular book was of interest to me. So, a small town school in western Maine, Milltown Greens Park, has a single claim to fame: its high school basketball team. A hero on the court, senior Sam Stiles led the Greens Park Academy to 3 consecutive state championships. He has become an off-court mover and shaker as well, and he sends a shockwave through the school's social hierarchy when he decides that capping his own high school career with a 4th victory will not be enough. He wants the girls' team to win one, too. So you can kind of see a little bit about the individual success of Sam Stiles' character, which is already interesting, and he's already a big-time person in the community, but he wants something more. He wants to leave a larger legacy than just simply winning and being successful as an individual, and for the boys' team to be successful collectively. So it really got my interest right there, just reading that first paragraph. So now the second paragraph. Standing between the girls and that state trophy is the person who is also their best hope of gaining it, a sophomore known as the Mutant, aka Deanie Gauthier. She is attitude incarnate, a quicksilver playmaker on the court, and a defiant pariah off it, as disliked as Sam is popular. If the girls are going to go all the way, Sam realizes he will have to straighten her out. So you get the contrast in characters that makes it even more interesting. You've got the perfect guy, the hometown king type character in Sam Stiles, and then you've got the outcast, the person that is the one that people are just kind of like, ooh, I don't know if I want to mess around too much with her, and Deanie Gauthier, aka the Mutant. So you have a contrasting characters right there, and yet you see them trying to pull it together to go toward eventually a shared goal. Okay, next paragraph. Saving Deanie from herself is no easy task, however. Behind the wild, tough girl, Sam discovers an unexpected soulmate, and he isn't prepared for the volatile, disturbing relationship that ignites between them and cuts radically across the grain of Greens Park's traditions. He wants her to take her team to the championship. She wants to take him where he's never been before. They both get more than they bargained for. Deanie must surrender the secrets shielded by her mutant facade, and Sam must take on their burden. It is an exchange that will transform both of their lives. So, you start to see the conflict that's going to be coming about as they move toward their shared goals, and they each has their own individual motives for what they truly want. And those two motives, his motives and her motives, with the baggage that each of them brings to the table, is going to create that little extra tension as they move toward the end of the story and the ultimate climax. Last paragraph. One-on-One is a remarkably engaging story of sexual initiation and awakening into love, of how growing up breaks and remakes family, of an adolescent culture that makes its own rules and enforces them in its own way. It is the story of a season full of pain and triumph, injury and healing, when the lives of two vividly realized human beings fatefully intertwine. Tabitha King has written a vigorously honest, richly textured novel that brilliantly evokes those exhilarating, unsettling growing up years. And as I read that inside cover and became even more interested in the story, I had no doubt in my mind, as finicky as I am as a reader and as tough as I am to please sometimes as a reader, I had no doubt that this was a story that I was going to want to devour, as probably was pointed out there in the inside cover. And as I started to read it in the early pages and early chapters, I really became hooked right off the bat. And again, for me, that's something that's not always easily done. I am one of those readers that if it's not catching me in the first few pages, I'll sometimes just be like, boop, you got to go. And I'll get rid of the story. And so for me to finish a story doesn't necessarily mean it's the greatest piece of literature that's ever been written, but it does mean that the story is has a certain level of engagement that really hooks a reader, and hooks a reader that is very picky about what he or she is going to finish. And in my case, it's obviously a he. And reading this story and getting through it, I remember immediately wanting to grab a composition book, and I started writing. And I ended up just kind of randomly just developing this story that I still have to this day, the handwritten copy, as well as the version that I typed out and put in a computer that no longer works and no longer exists. But I do have the hard copy of that story that someday I may pull out and rework and maybe publish it. It's a shorter story, but it's kind of an interesting story, and it was, again, my first one, so it always holds a special place in my heart, because it is my first story. But One-on-One is a very inspiring story to me. After I read that story, I went on a tear reading Tabitha King books. I read a couple other ones after that from her. The Book of Reuben, Survivor were a couple of books that I read after that because I was really inspired by some of her books and her way of writing. And I actually still have about 2 or 3 other books of hers that I haven't read yet, but I do intend to read because, again, I loved her writing style. And even as I went into other books, which I do sometimes with other authors, you read one book and you're inspired and you enjoy it and you want to see what other stories they have, if they can generate that same level of magic and interest that hooks you. And in Tabitha King's case, it did, because I read a couple more of her books and they ended up being really inspiring and enjoyable, and I finished them. And again, that's tough for me because I am a very, very picky reader. So it's a story that is a little bit older, and again, for people of this time and day and age with internet and Facebook, social media, all that stuff going on, mobile phones and whatnot, it's kind of a story from a different era in a lot of ways, but it's a very intriguing story. It's a story that has a lot of twists and turns, very compelling characters, and it was very engrossing for me. And so I was really glad that I discovered that book. And that it's interesting because I'd already read a couple of Stephen King. I'd read actually more than a couple. I'd read a bunch of Stephen King's books before I picked up that Tabitha King was an author, and I thought, check her out a little bit. And I ended up finding One-on-One, and it ended up being one of, if not my all-time favorite book that I've read. And I certainly appreciate that I was able to come across that book and to read it and to finish it. and to eventually read it again. And I do intend to actually read it again as well. And so maybe I'll offer a more in-depth review of the book once I've had a chance to read it again after I finish with some projects that I'm working on right now. So I just wanted to share in this vlog that story that I have of the book that inspired me to read more and the book that inspired me to get into creative writing and to eventually get to the point where I wanted to write and publish novels. So that's just a little bit from me, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you would, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you would, and look for more videos of this kind down the line on this channel. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you with the next video.